The gospel today is the pattern of doing the good news incarnate. If I was going to name this Sunday, which no one asked me to, I would call it the Sunday of the pattern of the gospel, the pattern of Jesus's life. There's a church year, a church calendar, and it comes around and around just as our usual calendar. There are two ordinary times in that calendar. Ordinary meaning the weeks during that time are numbered with ordinals, first, second, third. So these two ordinary times that are in between the big focus seasons, Lent, Advent, Christmas. One of these is the one that comes after Pentecost. It goes through the summer and most of the autumn. That's a very long, ordinary time. And then there's this one that we're in right now, the season after the Epiphany. And it just lasts between 5 and 9 weeks, depending where Easter is. This one, because it's so short, maybe, the readings that get chosen for this ordinary time after Epiphany are kind of staccato. They're brief, they're cliff notes on what it means to be on the way with Jesus. And especially when you read from Mark, we're in this whole year, we're journeying with Mark. And Mark always has that character of brevity and on the wayness. So we had Jesus's baptism. We had 2 weeks of Jesus calling disciples. And now last week and this week, Jesus is proclaiming the message, healing, and casting out demons. It is this season after Epiphany, a sort of sturdy little model for Christian living. If you ever want to remind yourself the model for discipleship or the following of Jesus, just go back and read the first chapter of Mark. This whole Epiphany season is just the first chapter of Mark. Particularly today, we see Jesus hitting his stride, I would say. He's done calling the disciples. Now he's about the work. And here's his pattern just in today's gospel. Synagogue for prayer, for instruction and sharpening of his faith. Fellowship with the people of God, going over to their house. Healing. More healing. Some sleep. And then prayer apart. And then finally on the way to more proclamation. There's plenty of stuff in that pattern, right? But synagogue, fellowship, healing, rest and prayer, and being on the way again for more storytelling. In the last sentence of the gospel there, Jesus says about proclamation, let me be on the way again to proclaim the message, for that is what I came out to do. But as a whole, looking at the whole pattern, I find it hard to emphasize any one piece as the point, the thing that Jesus came out to do. It feels more to me like he's always doing the next thing in that pattern. And we see that as we read through the gospel. He's going to keep on in this way. Mark describes Jesus very graciously moving from one thing to the next, consciously moving from one of these parts of the pattern to the next, and determinedly moving from one part of the pattern to the next. And that itself, the way Jesus moves through the pattern, seems to me part of the model for us as disciples. Especially because we see that Jesus is offered other options for how he might be using his time. Or another way to put that, he was pulled towards other options in this gospel. The demons, when he was going about healing and casting out demons, the demons would have liked to speak up and to make a great deal out of Jesus's amazing identity. knowing who Jesus was doesn't seem to have done the demons any good. So their point isn't to magnify his glory. Their point is to distract and to pull him away to a meaningless fight, maybe, or to be puffed up with his identity. But Jesus doesn't allow them to speak. And then after Jesus has done all this healing, well, first he heals one person, Simon's mother-in-law. Then the whole town shows up for healing, naturally. And by the next morning, everyone is looking for him. He was on a roll there. He could have stayed around, founded a synagogue, just been pulled in by that. And what's wrong with helping people that want to be helped? That seems good. But Jesus was very clear. He was on the way somewhere else. He was clear about his self, and he knew what his purpose was on the way. So we look at that pattern and we look at the way that Jesus held to it. I started asking myself, what allowed him to keep? What allows Jesus to keep to that pattern, to know whether it's time to settle down and found a synagogue or whether it's time to keep moving on? And I got a vision of Jesus in his years before this, the weeks and months and years before his baptism, before his public ministry, that what we're seeing here with Jesus on the road with his disciples is that he is relying on patterns that he's already built in his self. That if the healing and the proclamation publicly, if those were new to him, the synagogue practice, the fellowship practice, and the prayer, the personal prayer apart, were not new to Jesus, I don't think. I believe that Jesus was able to move confidently, to move graciously, and to move firmly through the pattern of his amazing life with God and with his neighbors. Because of something, and this is elsewhere, this is in John's gospel, where Jesus says, I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of the one who sent me. I think his synagogue practice, his fellowship, and his personal prayer helped him keep a hold of that kernel. I'm here not for my own purpose, but for God's purpose, all through what would be an amazing ministry. And when he says, I've come down from heaven not to do my will, but the will of the one who sent me, it sounds very magnificent and singular. But any of us could say it this way: I was born on earth not to follow my own agenda, but to accomplish the hope and the will of God. Any of us could make that statement. Jesus was able to keep taking bold next steps because even if the challenges and the temptations of healing and of proclamation and whatever else he was called to do out on the road, even if all those were new to him, he was already clear that it wasn't about his purpose, but God's purpose. And we can do the same. We can come to that deeper knowing that we're born not to our own agenda, but to God's hope. And I thought, as an analogy to this, I kind of thought, when you're trying to leave somewhere and you want to leave the party, remember when we used to have parties? You want to leave the party, but you can't quite get up the gumption to say, I'm ready to leave, bye, it's been real. So you say, well, I got to get home to my kids. Or, I got this other thing going on. It's not the most courageous stance, but it occurs to me that there's something similar in being able to keep moving by saying, God needs me over there. And maybe that is a courageous stance to say, yeah, I could stick around, but I need to be about God's hope and God's purpose. With Jesus's pattern of synagogue, fellowship, prayer apart, life could throw him all kinds of things, and it did throw him lots of the most terrible things as he passed through it. And we'll get there in Lent, right? And Holy Week. But Jesus kept his sense of direction and his calm and his belovedness all through it. And that, Mark chapter 1, the very beginning of the earliest gospel, that is the little handbook after Epiphany. May it be there as a go-to for all of us on our own way. Amen.